For a long time, one single number haunted American police. 147 kilometers per hour. That was the 1969 Dodge Polara, the fastest police sedan in the world that had ever rolled off an assembly line. And for a quarter of a century, no one who wore a badge even came close to it. What do you think, friends? Why did that happen? Write it in the comments. The era of those machines simply stopped existing. Emission laws strangled the big engines. Police sedans became slower, and they stayed slower. And the old Dodge Polara just sat there, year after year, like a question nobody could answer. Then, quietly, without fanfare and without a giant engine, a car appeared that people would later say, this one finally killed the legend. A simple, rounded Chevrolet that looked more like a rental sedan than a hunter. Officers loved it. Enthusiasts and wealthy collectors still fight over them at auctions today. And if you ask around, you'll hear the same thing again and again. That was the car that finally broke the 25-year record. Only the truth is a little different, and in my opinion, much more interesting than the legend. Because this car really did put an end to the long reign of the Polara, but not in the way almost everyone remembers, and not in the way everyone keeps repeating. This is the story of the Chevrolet Caprice 9C1, the machine that quietly closed one era and just as quietly opened another. To understand what it actually did, you need to remember what shape American police fleets were in at the beginning of the 90s. In the early 90s, American police cars had already spent almost 15 years as if they were lost in a dark forest. The great crisis of the 70s, stricter emission rules, 2 oil shocks, and the hard power cuts, all of that carved the muscle out of patrol sedans. The lowest point came with the famous household cars of the 80s, police sedans so weak that some of them could barely reach 90 kilometers per hour. An entire category seemed to have left the game. A typical patrol sedan of those years was soft, heavy, and slow. Reliable? Yes. Fast? No. Nobody even thought that fast and police could stand next to each other again.
2 cars divided the market at that time, the Ford Crown Victoria and the Chevrolet Caprice. Big, body-on-frame, rear-wheel drive sedans. The classic recipe. Both were comfortable, and neither of them scared anyone at 100 kilometers per hour. It was a quiet, calm, almost boring state of the police car. Then, in 1991, Chevrolet did something that completely blew up public opinion. They completely redesigned the Caprice. The new car looked radical. The clean, sharp sidelines that had defined American police cars and taxis for decades disappeared. In their place came a soft, round, aerodynamic body that people immediately started laughing at. The whale, the floating whale, the soap bubble, the upside-down bathtub. With its cross-shaped headlights and puffy sides, the 1991 Caprice looked like one of the most ridiculous cars Detroit had ever built, and buyers weren't shy about saying so. You understand, people were openly laughing at a police car. But under that strange skin, something important was happening, and it had nothing to do with appearance, because that ridiculous rounded shape turned out to be slippery. Underneath, the car stayed traditional. The same frame, the same rear-wheel drive, the same full-size General Motors platform that had long worked as a reliable workhorse. Only the skin changed. And that new skin turned out to be critically important. The old boxy Caprice pushed air like a brick. The new whale, no matter what you thought of it, sliced through it. And aerodynamics, as it turned out, is exactly what decides everything when you're trying to squeeze out top speed. That same rounded body everyone was laughing at in the parking lot was quietly preparing a car that could be faster at the top end than anything police had driven in years. Chevrolet almost accidentally built the right shape. What it still didn't have was the right engine. For the first 3 years, the Caprice ran on soft, mild V8s. Decent, durable, but not the kind people would later write legends about. Everything changed in 1994, and it changed everything. In 1994, Chevrolet walked into its engine department and pulled out the heavy artillery, the LT1. This was not some economy motor. The LT1 belonged to the same family of engines that powered the C4 Corvette and the Camaro Z28, a real modern 5.7-liter V8 with sequential fuel injection and reverse flow cooling. Chevrolet took a version of that engine, adapted it for police duty with warmer calibrations, and dropped it into the 9C1 package. The result? The police 9C1 made 260 horsepower and 330 newton-meters of torque. Here we need to make an honest clarification, because this channel tries to stay fair. The police LT1 was not simply a Corvette engine with the catalytic converter unplugged. The blocks, the heads, the camshafts, everything was different. But the blood was the same. And that blood was enough to turn the whale from a joke into a weapon. 260 horsepower sounds modest today, but put it into that slippery aerodynamic body and the effect becomes dramatic. The 9C1 reached 100 kilometers per hour in about 7 seconds. And most importantly, it kept pulling hard at the top, exactly where the shape started working for real. Overnight, the Caprice became the fastest car in the police fleet and left the Ford Crown Victoria, which had been its equal only a year earlier, behind.
But the engine was only half of what made the 9C1 special. The other half was the code itself. The code 9C1 is the key to the entire car. It was General Motors' internal factory code for the special police package. One little box turned an ordinary family Caprice into a tool built for one single job. The 9C1 got everything heavy-duty. Reinforced fenders, cooling openings, stiffer front and rear stabilizers, quicker steering, 4-channel ABS, a limited-slip rear axle, and upgraded engine and transmission cooling. Everything needed so the car could survive hour after hour of hard pursuits and high speeds. And let's immediately kill one common myth. People often say Chevrolet put a special heavy-duty frame under the 9C1. That's not true. There was no separate police frame. What the 9C1 really had was heavy-duty suspension, extra cooling, and the right wheels mounted on the standard full-size chassis. And that turned out to be more than enough.
But here's what made the 9C1 a legend among the people who actually drove it. It was invincible. Park a 9C1 next to a civilian Caprice or next to a taxi, and almost nobody can tell them apart. The same wet, rounded shape, the same anonymous profile, the same beige sedan. The fastest police car in America could sit on the shoulder and look like the most harmless vehicle on the road, until the light bar lit up. For undercover work, for quiet patrol, for catching people who thought they knew what a police car looked like, it was perfect. The wetness and the roundness became its camouflage. Nobody is afraid of a beige whale, and that was exactly its strength. If you need proof of how good the package really was, just remember that Chevrolet also built a civilian version. The 1994 Impala SS that car enthusiasts fell in love with was basically the same 9C1, only in nicer clothes. The same LT1, the same heavy chassis.
Heavy chassis, just a colored body and alloy wheels. The police car and the civilian one differed about as much as one light differs from another spoiler. So the 9C1 had the shape, the engine, and the hardware. It was fast, tough, and invisible. Which finally brings us to the main question this whole story is built around. The claim you'll hear from enthusiasts, in used car listings, and in half the comments on the internet. This is the car, the LT1 Caprice, that finally beat the 25-year speed record of the 1969 Polara. It's a great story. It gets repeated everywhere. And as almost always happens in these cases, it's only half true. Here's what the hard, independent data actually shows. Every year, the Michigan State Police run the most respected standardized test in the business. They take every police car to the track and measure its real top speed over multiple runs. When they tested the 1994 LT1 Caprice 9C1, the number came out to 141 kilometers per hour. 141. That's genuinely fast, faster than any police sedan in decades, and it beat everything else in the field that year. But it's not 147. It fell about 6 kilometers per hour short of the old Dodge.
And here's a detail that explains a lot of the confusion. That 141 figure often depended not on the car itself, but on the speed limiter the customer ordered. Chevrolet let departments choose how fast their cars would go and tied the limit to the speed rating of the tires they ordered. So one Caprice could be capped at 141, another at 132, and a few, because the fleet manager chose the wrong tire package, even at 120. That's why to this day you still hear widely different top speed numbers for the same car. The Caprice's ceiling depended on paperwork almost as much as on horsepower. So where did the record-breaking claim come from? It seems to have started with General Motors itself, from marketing materials that said the LT1 Caprice had passed the old Dodge by several dozen kilometers per hour. A great line for selling police cars. It stuck, and it is still repeated as fact. But the independent test data does not support it. When you look at the numbers that were actually measured instead of the numbers that were advertised, the 1969 Polara was still, in the mid-90s, the fastest police sedan that had ever been officially recorded. The Caprice was the fastest police car of its time, but not the fastest of all time. Not yet.
And that difference matters, because the entire reputation of an honest story rests on calling things by their real names. It would have been easier to repeat the popular version and move on, but the honest version is more interesting. For a few years in the mid-90s, two cars sat together at the top of the mountain. The old Mopar King from 1969 and the ugly duckling Chevrolet from 1994. The gap was several decades and about 6 kilometers per hour, and the Caprice never got the chance to close that final gap, because in 1996, General Motors killed it. The end came quickly, and it came from the factory, not from the track. GM needed the Arlington, Texas plant that built the big rear-drive cars to build something more profitable, the full-size trucks and SUVs that were exploding in popularity and in money. So the Caprice, the Impala SS, and the entire family of big rear-drive sedans were discontinued after 1996. Just when police finally had a truly capable full-size cruiser again, the company that built it walked away, jumping to rear-drive SUVs. The last great American full-size police sedan of its generation was gone, and for the next decade, the pursuit car business belonged almost entirely to the Ford Crown Victoria.
But police departments did not let the Caprice go easily, and that, in my view, is the best measure of how good the 9C1 really was. Even after 1996, long after they could no longer buy a new one, an entire cottage industry grew up around keeping these cars alive. Specialist shops bought tired Caprices, rebuilt them, and sold them back into police service, because departments still wanted them, and nothing new could offer the same combination: speed, durability, high top speed, anonymity, and toughness. Agencies kept their LT1 Caprices far beyond their natural retirement age, because nothing available at the time could match what the Caprice delivered: longevity, reliability, speed, invisibility, and character. Officers who drove them still talk about them the same way the previous generation talked about the Polara. In 1991, everyone laughed at this soapy car, and in the end, it became one of the most respected police cars of the modern era.
And that brings us back to the Polara record, and to the twist most people miss. The Caprice did not beat that record, but it did something that was perhaps more important. It proved the record could be beaten again. For 25 years, the number 147 looked eternal, a relic of a lost golden age that modern emission rules would never allow to be repeated. The LT1 Caprice, running 141, brought the Polara back within striking distance for the first time in a generation. It showed everyone that a modern police car could once again be seriously fast. The Caprice asked the question. The answer arrived in the 2000s, and in one of the sweetest pieces of symmetry in this whole story, it came from Dodge itself, the original creator of the Polara. When the Michigan State Police tested the new Dodge Chargers in the late 2000s, they finally did what the Caprice could not. They destroyed the old Polara mark. After roughly 37 years, the 1969 record fell, and it was a Dodge that killed a Dodge.
And the numbers didn't stop there. In recent years, the fastest police sedans have climbed even higher. The late Australian Caprice, sold under the same proud name, eventually punched through about 155 kilometers per hour, comfortably above everything the 1969 car had done. Here we need an honest flag, because the sources on this topic are not perfectly clean. You'll find slightly different top speed figures for the Polara, from 147 to almost 150, depending on which test and which account you trust. And you'll find people arguing about exactly which year the record finally fell. That's the nature of records set on different tracks, in different decades, under different rules. But the shape of the story does not change. In 1969, the Polara ruled for a quarter of a century. In 1994, the Caprice came close and reopened the question. And the modern Hemi cars finally closed it. The Caprice became the bridge between two eras.
So, if we look back at what this strange, sad, and remarkable machine really was, the Chevrolet Caprice 9C1 is not remembered as the fastest police car ever built. And the popular claim that it beat the Polara does not survive a hard look at the data. It was the car that ended a long, dark age. It took an aerodynamic body everyone laughed at, married it to a Corvette family engine, wrapped the whole thing in the toughest police package of its day, and hid it all inside the most forgettable-looking sedan on the road. It gave American police their speed back, and it did it quietly. That was an incredible success. That's why enthusiasts still hunt for them. That's why surviving officers still talk about them with real respect. And that's why the Chevrolet Caprice 9C1, the car Detroit first laughed at and then abandoned, deserves a place in this history right next to the Mopar legends. This was the Chevrolet that gave the police their hunter back.
Because for a few years, the funniest-looking car on the American road was also one of the fastest that ever wore a badge. A Corvette-hearted machine hiding under taxi skin, sitting quietly on the shoulder, waiting for someone who was sure they couldn't possibly be looking at a police car. This was Badges in Chrome, the channel that digs up the real stories of police cars that almost got forgotten. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.